You really thought a restraining order was going to stop me? I own you, Rebecca. I will always find you. Please, somebody, help me. 2 a.m. outside a hospital emergency exit.
I know you
Smells
took
like
it.
bleach and cold fear. I remember the exact second my
Tell me
wrist
where
snapped
it is.
backward in someone's grip. Not because of the pain. Pain was old news with Larry, but because of what I saw over his shoulder. A matte black Chevy SUV, parked where nothing should have been parked, engine running, headlights cutting 2 pale scars across the wet concrete. The exit sign above the steel double doors buzzed and flickered, throwing a sick reddish glow across everything. Made the whole scene look like it was bleeding. My maroon sweater was still damp from 12 straight hours, mopping up after other people's emergencies. I'd barely clocked out. I'd just pushed through the side exit, keys already between my fingers, the way women learn to hold them when nobody's watching. Shoulder bag cutting into my neck. Feet aching. Head full of nothing except the walk to my car and the promise of silence. Then his hand found me. Larry Villafane. 6'1", of unfinished rage, wrapped in an olive green jacket and a hoodie pulled low. The beard was thicker than I remembered, like he'd stopped caring about the parts of himself that weren't dedicated to hunting me. He grabbed my left wrist with both hands, yanked me backward so hard, my sneakers scraped a black streak across the pavement. You really thought you could disappear on me? His voice wasn't loud. That was the terrifying part. Larry only whispered when he meant every single syllable. His cologne, that same cheap, sharp musk he'd worn the night, he fractured my eye socket, flooded my nose, and dragged me back to every room I'd locked myself inside of. Every lie I'd told the ER nurse about walking into a door. Every night I'd slept in my car, because going home meant going to war. I'd known Larry for 3 years, loved him for 1, feared him for 2, left him 2 months ago, moved across town, changed my shifts, deleted every account. Told nobody. Nobody except Terrence, the night security guard who walked me to my car on the late shifts. Sweet, dependable Terrence, who always asked about my day and never asked why my hands shook. Terrence sold my schedule to Larry for drug money. I didn't know that yet. Not then. Standing in that parking lot with Larry's fingers grinding into my wrist bone, all I knew was that the nightmare had followed me to the one place I thought it couldn't reach. He twisted my arm behind my back and shoved me against the brick wall beside the exit door. The back of my skull hit mortar. Stars burst white behind my eyes. My bag hit the ground. My phone skittered across the concrete, screen cracking, spinning to a stop 10 feet away like it was trying to escape too. You're coming home. His forearm pressed into my collarbone. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. My body did what it always did around Larry. It froze, locked up like someone had pulled the fuse out of my spine. I could feel my own heartbeat in my teeth, but my legs wouldn't move. My mouth wouldn't open. I was going to die against the back wall of the place I worked. That's the thought that went through me. Not help, not fight, just, this is where it ends. Between a dumpster and a loading dock, under a flickering exit sign, with nobody coming, and then somebody came. I didn't see his face first. I saw his shoes. Black leather, polished to a mirror finish, stepping onto cracked concrete like the pavement wasn't worthy of them. Then I saw his hand pale, deliberate fingers gripping the edge of the SUV's open door. Faint dark lines of ink traced across his knuckles and disappeared under the cuff of his sleeve. A tattoo that whispered of things done in rooms I'd never enter. The car door eased shut behind him, controlled, deliberate. Like even the sound of metal, meeting metal, answered to him. When I finally looked up, I saw Ryeo In Ho for the first time. He wasn't tall, maybe 5 to 10, but he moved like the air made room for him. All black. Tailored suit jacket that fit like a second skin. Black dress shirt underneath, open at the collar, no tie. His hair was dark and swept cleanly off his forehead, every strand deliberate. His jaw was carved. His cheekbones could have cut the tension in half all by themselves. But it was his eyes that stopped everything. Black, not brown. not dark brown. Black, like looking into two windows with the curtains drawn. No anger, no urgency, no expression at all. Just a flat, terrifying calm that made Larry's violence look like a child throwing a tantrum. He didn't run, he walked, slow, measured, each step placed with the precision of a man who had never once needed to hurry because the world waited for him, not the other way around. Behind him, the SUV idled a low, mechanical growl. Two shadows sat in the front seats, motionless. Larry's grip on me loosened, not because he chose to let go, because he felt it. That thing in the air. That shift. Like the entire parking lot had just been sealed inside a vacuum, and all the oxygen was leaking out through the cracks in the concrete. Inho stopped 6 feet away. He looked at Larry the way you look at a stain on an expensive tablecloth. Not with anger. With inconvenience. Then his gaze shifted to me. For 1 second, one fraction of a second, something passed behind those black eyes. Not warmth, not pity. Something colder. Something that looked almost like recognition. He spoke. One word. His voice was low, unhurried, with an accent that turned consonants into something elegant and final. Release. Larry blinked. His chest was heaving, sweat beading under the sodium lights. He looked at Inho, then at the SUV, then back at Inho. I watched the calculation happen behind Larry's eyes, the same calculation he made every time he sized up, whether someone was a threat or a witness. He chose wrong. Mind your business, pretty boy. Larry's hand tightened on my arm. This is between me and... He never finished the sentence. Inho moved. Not fast the way action movies make you think fast. Looks flashy, exaggerated, telegraphed. He moved the way a blade moves through paper. One step closed the distance. His left hand caught Larry's wrist. His right drove the heel of his palm into Larry's nose. The sound was wet and immediate. Larry's grip on me evaporated. He staggered backward, blood already pouring between his fingers, and Inho followed him, like gravity, calm, inevitable, absolute. What happened next took 11 seconds. I counted them later in my head, rewinding the memory over and over. 11 seconds to dismantle a man I had spent 2 years believing was indestructible. Inho hit Larry 3 more times. Each strike was surgical. Jaw, ribs, knee. Larry folded like wet cardboard and hit the ground with a sound I can still hear when the room gets too quiet. He didn't get up. He curled into himself and made a noise I'd never heard come out of him before. Small, broken, animal. Inho stood over him for a moment. He adjusted his cuff. He didn't even look winded. Then he turned to me. I was shaking so hard my teeth rattled. My back was still pressed against the wall. My wrist was already bruising purple where Larry had held it. Tears I didn't feel coming were running down my face, and I couldn't tell if they were from pain or shock or some savage, guilty relief that someone had finally done to Larry what I'd imagined doing every night for 2 years. Inho extended his hand, palm up, fingers open like he was offering me something fragile. Come with me. Not a question, but not quite a command either. It sat somewhere in between, in that dangerous gray space where choices stop being choices and start being lifelines. I looked at Larry bleeding on the concrete. I looked at the black SUV, still growling behind the stranger in the suit. I looked at the hospital exit sign, still buzzing, still bleeding red light across everything. And I took his hand. I didn't know his name yet. I didn't know that he owned the medical supply company that kept my hospital running. I didn't know he'd been watching me for weeks, rearranging my shift patterns through back channels, making sure I was never truly alone during the late hours. I didn't know that his name was Ryeo In Ho, that he commanded a syndicate that stretched from Seoul to Seattle, that the tattoo on his hand was a rank, marking in an organization that solved problems the way other people solve crossword puzzles, methodically, permanently, and in ink. All I knew, in that moment, standing under a dying exit sign at 2 a.m, with blood on the concrete and a stranger's hand in mine, was one thing. Larry had been the most dangerous man in my world for 2 years. Standing in that parking lot, watching him bleed at another man's feet, I realized he wasn't anymore. And God help me, that felt like freedom. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. The inside of the SUV smelled like leather and something faintly metallic, gun oil, maybe, or the memory of it. I didn't register climbing in. 1 second, I was standing against that brick wall with my hand in a stranger's hand, and the next, I was sinking into a back seat so dark it swallowed me whole. The door closed. Not slammed. Placed. Everything about this man and his world was placed. Through the tinted window I watched Inho walk back to where Larry lay crumpled on the concrete. Larry was trying to get up. His arms were shaking, palms flat on the ground, blood dripping from his nose and pooling in the cracks of the pavement like the parking lot was drinking it. He made it to one knee. That was as far as he got. Inho kicked him in the ribs. Not wildly, not with rage, with the mechanical precision of a man resetting a dislocated joint. Larry's body lifted off the ground and came back down sideways, his mouth open in a scream that the SUV's soundproofing turned into a distant, muffled thing. Like watching violence through a television screen. Inho crouched beside him. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw Larry's face change. Not just pain anymore. Something deeper. Something I recognized because I'd worn it on my own face for 2 years. Pure, marrow-deep terror. Inho stood up, straightened his jacket, walked back to the SUV, and slid into the seat beside me, like he'd just finished a phone call. The 2 men in the front seats hadn't moved once. The driver put the vehicle in gear without being told, and we pulled out of that parking lot in absolute silence. I should have spoken. I should have asked where we were going, who he was, what was happening. But the adrenaline crash hit me like a wall of black water. My hands were trembling so violently I had to press them between my knees to keep them still. My wrist throbbed where Larry had held it, the bruise already blooming dark against my skin. I opened my mouth twice to say something, and both times, nothing came out except a shaky exhale that fogged the window beside me. Inho didn't speak either. He sat with his hands resting on his thighs, his posture relaxed, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Like I wasn't even there. Like saving a woman from being beaten to death in a parking lot was a minor detour on his commute. The city blurred past, traffic lights smearing red and green across the rain-streaked glass. I tried to track the turns left on Mercer, right at the overpass, onto a highway I didn't recognize. But the exhaustion swallowed my sense of direction whole. At some point, my eyes closed. Not because I felt safe, because my body simply gave out, the way a circuit breaker trips when the load finally exceeds what the wiring can carry. I don't remember falling asleep. I remember waking up. The light was wrong. Too warm, too golden, too soft. Hospital light is flat and blue-white, designed to keep you alert and slightly miserable. This light was amber, the kind that comes from lamps with actual fabric shades, and it made the ceiling above me look like honey. I was lying on a bed that felt like it was made of clouds. Someone had stitched into a mattress. Egyptian cotton. I didn't know what Egyptian cotton felt like before that morning, but I knew this wasn't the polyester blend from my studio apartment. I sat up too fast. My head spun. My wrist screamed. I was still wearing my maroon sweater and jeans, but my sneakers had been removed and placed neatly beside the bed. My shoulder bag sat on a chair near the door untouched, the zipper still half open, the way I always left it. Someone had carried me here without waking me, undressed my feet without disturbing my clothes, and arranged my belongings like they were handling evidence. The room was enormous, hardwood floors, the color of dark chocolate, a window that stretched nearly floor to ceiling, covered by heavy curtains that let in just enough daylight to tell me it was late morning. A writing desk. A bookshelf filled with titles in Korean and English. A door that I assumed led to a bathroom. Another door thicker, heavier, that I assumed led out. I went for the heavy door first. The handle turned. I pulled it open and stepped into a hallway that looked like it belonged in a museum. Polished marble floors, recessed lighting. A runner rug that probably cost more than my car. At the far end, a staircase curved downward. I could hear faint sounds from below, a television murmur, the clink of dishes, the low hum of people existing in a space designed for existing comfortably. I made it 3 steps before a woman appeared at the top of the staircase. She was Korean, mid-40s maybe, dressed in a simple black blouse and slacks. Her smile was warm and immediate. "Miss Bennett, good morning. Did you sleep well?" She knew my name. "Where am I?" "You're safe." She said it like that answered everything. "My name is Mrs. Yoon. I manage the household. Mr. Ryeo asked me to make sure you're comfortable. Are you hungry? I can have breakfast prepared for you. I need to leave." Her smile didn't waver, but something behind it shifted. A flicker of rehearsal, like she'd practiced this exact moment. "Of course. But perhaps breakfast first? You've been through a great deal. Mr. Ryeo will return this afternoon, and I'm sure he'd prefer to speak with you before." "I need to leave now." Mrs. Yoon folded her hands. "I understand. Unfortunately, the estate is quite remote, and transportation has not yet been arranged. I can assure you that you are not a prisoner here, Miss Bennett. You are a guest, but guests can leave when they want to." And the way she stood, not blocking the staircase exactly, but centered in it, grounded, told me everything her polite words didn't. I looked past her, down the stairs, and saw through a massive window on the landing, a sprawling property I didn't recognize. Manicured grounds. A wall in the distance that was definitely too tall to be decorative. A gate. A guardhouse beside the gate, with a man standing in it. Not a prisoner, just a guest who couldn't leave. I went back to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of that impossibly soft bed, and for the first time since Larry's hand closed around my wrist the night before, I cried. Not gentle, cinematic tears. Ugly, full-body sobbing that turned my ribs inside out and left me gasping on sheets that smelled like lavender. Because I knew this feeling. I knew it the way you know the layout of a room you've been locked inside of too many times. The silk had changed. The walls were prettier. The cage was bigger. But the weight of someone else's control pressing down on my chest was exactly the same. The last time I felt it this strongly was 10 weeks ago. Larry's apartment. The night that broke me open enough to finally run. He'd been drinking since 4 in the afternoon, the brown liquor, which was always worse than the clear. I'd come home from a double shift and found him sitting on the couch in the dark, the television off, just sitting there with a glass balanced on his knee like a man waiting for a bus. I knew before I put my keys down. You learn to read the weather in an abuser's body, the way sailors read the sky. The stillness was the storm. He didn't hit me right away. That wasn't Larry's style when the brown liquor was involved. First came the interrogation. Where was I? Who was I with? Why did I take so long? Why was my phone on silent? Who texted me at 11:47 p.m.? It was the hospital's shift reminder system. But that didn't matter. Facts didn't matter with Larry. Evidence didn't matter. Reality was whatever narrative fed his paranoia, and that night, the narrative was that I was sleeping with someone at work. The first hit came when I said, "That's crazy," his open palm across my mouth, not his fist that came later. Larry always started with the palm, like he was easing into it, warming up. The palm became a backhand. The backhand became a closed fist against my left eye socket. I felt the bone crack. Not break crack, like a plate with a hairline fracture that still holds together but will never be the same. I hit the floor. He stood over me and told me I made him do this. That if I just answered my phone, if I'd just come home on time, if I'd just been what he needed me to be, none of this would happen. I lay on that floor for 45 minutes after he passed out on the couch. I stared at the ceiling and made a plan. 2 weeks later, I was gone. New address, new shifts, new phone number. The restraining order was a piece of paper. Papers don't stop men like Larry. I knew that even when I filed it. But it was the only weapon the system offered women like me. So I took it, and I prayed it would be enough. It wasn't enough. None of it was enough. Because Terrence kind, dependable, trustworthy. Terrence had sold every detail of my new life to the man I was hiding from. And now here I was, in another powerful man's house, behind another set of walls I couldn't get past. I was still sitting on the edge of the bed when the door opened that afternoon. No knock. Inho walked in the way he walked, everywhere like gravity parted for him, and closed again in his wake. He'd changed from the suit. Black slacks, a charcoal sweater with the sleeves pushed to his elbows. The tattoos on his forearms were fully visible now. Intricate, dark, deliberate work that crawled from his wrists to his inner elbows. Patterns I didn't recognize, mixed with characters I couldn't read. He sat in the chair across from me, not the desk chair, the one near the window, where the afternoon light caught the sharp planes of his face and made his eyes look like polished obsidian. He crossed one leg over the other and studied me for a moment with that same flat, unreadable expression from the parking lot. "You've been crying," he said. Not a question, not concern, an observation, the way a doctor notes a symptom. "I want to go home." "You don't have a home. Larry Villafane was inside your apartment 2 hours before he found you at the hospital. He broke the lock, went through your things, took photographs of your new address, and sent them to himself." The air left my lungs. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been watching him watch you for the past 3 weeks. The silence that followed was so heavy I could feel it pressing against my eardrums. Inho let it sit. He didn't rush to fill it, didn't soften it, didn't look away. He just let the weight of what he'd said settle into the room like smoke. "My name is Ryeo In Ho. I run a private organization with interests in shipping, pharmaceuticals, and medical supply distribution, among other things. The company that supplies your hospital MedCore Logistics is mine. It is a legitimate business entity that also serves as infrastructure for operations that are not legitimate. I am, by most legal definitions, a criminal." He said it the way someone else might say, "I'm an accountant." Flat, factual, unbothered by the moral weight of it. "I became aware of you 4 months ago, during a routine audit of MedCore's hospital contracts. Your name appeared on a staffing report. Background flagged. An active restraining order. I investigated the order. I investigated Larry Villafane. And I investigated you." "Why?" He paused. It was the first time I'd seen him hesitate, and it lasted less than a second, a hairline fracture in that marble composure. "Because you reminded me of someone I failed to protect a long time ago. And because Larry Villafane is the kind of man who does not stop until someone stops him permanently." "So you've been stalking me?" "I've been ensuring you survive. Your shift changes over the past 6 weeks, the ones your supervisor told you were due to budget restructuring. I arranged those. The parking lot camera outside the east exit that was supposedly broken for 3 months. My people disabled it to eliminate a blind spot Larry was using to monitor your schedule. The night Terrence Hollis walked you to your car, and you thought he was being kind. He was reporting your departure time to Villafane within 90 seconds of you driving away. I intercepted 2 of those messages. I felt sick. The room was tilting. Every moment of the last 2 months that I thought was mine, my choices, my schedule, my fragile sense of starting over, had been a chessboard. Larry on one side, this man on the other, and me, walking across the squares thinking I was free. Last night, Inho continued. My surveillance confirmed Villafane was en route to the hospital. I could have had him intercepted before he reached you. I chose not to. My blood went cold. You let him grab me? I needed him to act. A man restrained in advance becomes a grievance. A man caught in the act becomes a problem that can be solved without ambiguity. I stared at him. This beautiful, terrifying man sitting in a pool of afternoon light, telling me he'd used my body as bait with the same tone most people use to discuss the weather. You're insane. I'm thorough. There's a difference. He stood, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame, and looked back at me over his shoulder. You can leave whenever you wish, Rebecca. Mrs. Yoon will arrange a car. But I should tell you Larry Villafane left the hospital parking lot alive. Humiliated. Injured. And now, more dangerous than he has ever been. If you go back to your world, he will find you again. And next time, I may not be positioned to intervene. He left the door open behind him. The hallway stretched out, quiet and golden and endless. An open door. A choice that wasn't really a choice. I didn't follow him, but I didn't leave either. Across the city, in a motel room that smelled like mildew and burnt coffee, Larry Villafane sat on the edge of a stained mattress and held a bag of ice to his swollen jaw. 3 of his ribs were cracked. His nose was broken in 2 places. Every breath sounded like paper tearing. But the pain wasn't what made his hands shake. It was the humiliation. The image seared into his brain of that man, that pretty, suited, dead-eyed man, standing over him in that parking lot. Looking down at him the way you look at something stuck to the bottom of your shoe. Larry had been feared his entire adult life. He'd built his identity on it, brick by violent brick. And in 11 seconds, a stranger had demolished the entire structure and walked away adjusting his cuffs. He picked up his phone, scrolled to a contact saved under a fake name, hit dial. Terrence Hollis answered on the 3rd ring, his voice nervous and hushed. I told you, man. I can't keep. Shut up. Larry's voice was a wreck nasal, thick, wet with blood he kept swallowing. The man at the hospital. Black SUV. Black suit. Who is he? I don't know what you're... Terrence. Larry stood up. The ice bag hit the floor. His reflection stared back at him from the bathroom mirror, swollen, lopsided, unrecognizable. You told me she'd be alone. You said nobody ever picks her up. So who was he? Silence. Then, quietly, I don't know, I swear. I never seen that car before. Then you're going to find out. The SUV had plates. There are cameras in the East Lot. The East Lot cameras have been down for months. Larry went still. His eyes narrowed in the mirror. Cameras down for months. A man who appeared out of nowhere at 2 a.m, already positioned, already waiting. That wasn't coincidence. That was planning. Get me everything, Larry said, his voice dropping to that whisper that Rebecca knew meant the worst was coming. The license plate. Security footage from every other angle. Employee logs, visitor records, everything. You have 48 hours. Larry, I can't just... You owe me, Terrence. You owe me for every bag I've fronted you for the last 6 months. You get me what I need. Or I walk into that hospital with your name and every text you've ever sent me, and I hand it all to your supervisor. Then I hand it to the police. Then I come find you personally. The line went quiet. Larry could hear Terrence breathing shallow, rapid, the breath of a man who'd just realized the cage he'd built around himself. 48 hours, Terrence whispered. Larry hung up. He sat back down on the mattress. The springs groaned. He stared at his busted reflection and ran his tongue across the gap where his molar used to be before that suited ghost had rearranged his face. He was going to find out who that man was. He was going to find out where Rebecca was. And then he was going to burn whatever world they thought they could hide inside. Larry Villafane had never been the smartest man in any room, but he had always been the most relentless. And the man in the black suit had just made the mistake every enemy Larry had ever buried had made before him. He'd left Larry alive. If you're hooked on Rebecca and Inho's dangerous love story, smash that subscribe button and ring that bell, because the next chapter is going to change everything. Comment below Team Inho or Team Run. Don't miss what happens next. Her new life is about to face its deadliest test yet. See you in the next one. 3 days passed inside that estate, like time had been poured into honey. Everything moved slow. The mornings were silent, except for the sound of Mrs. Yoon's shoes on marble and the distant murmur of men speaking Korean into phones behind closed doors. I was given clothes my size, my taste, tags still on, as if someone had studied my closet before I'd arrived. I was given meals prepared by a chef who asked me about allergies and preferences with the seriousness of a man defusing a bomb. I was given space, courtesy, privacy. I was given everything except the truth about why any of it was happening. On the 4th evening, I found Inho alone. He was sitting in a room I hadn't entered before, a study on the ground floor with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a fireplace that crackled like it had been burning since before I was born. He had a glass of something dark in his hand, and he was reading a book with a Korean title I couldn't decipher. He didn't look up when I walked in, but he knew I was there. Men like Inho always know. I sat in the chair across from him without being invited. He turned a page. The fire popped. Outside, rain streaked the tall windows and turned the floodlit grounds into a watercolor. You killed people. I said it flat, not a question. I needed him to hear it as a fact I was holding in my hands, deciding what to do with. He closed the book, set it on the side table, looked at me with those black, lightless eyes. Yes. How many? Enough that I stopped counting and started delegating. My stomach turned, but I held his gaze. And you think buying me clothes and feeding me expensive food makes you different from Larry? He bought me things too. Right after he hit me. Flowers the morning after he fractured my eye socket. A necklace the week after he threw me into a wall. You're just a man with a bigger budget and a nicer cage. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, I'd braced for anger and it didn't come. Instead, something quieter. A crack in the marble so small you'd miss it if you blinked. You're right, he said. I am a violent man. I have done things that would make your worst night with Larry Villafane look like a disagreement over dinner. I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. He leaned forward. The firelight caught the ink on his forearms and made the tattoos look alive, writhing. But I need you to answer something honestly, Rebecca. Not for me. For yourself. His voice dropped, not to a whisper, to something beneath a whisper, something that vibrated in the space between us, like a plucked string. In the 4 days you've been in this house, behind these walls, surrounded by men who would die before they let someone touch you, have you checked the locks before you went to sleep? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Have you flinched at a footstep in the hallway? Have you slept with your shoes on in case you needed to run? Have you rehearsed an escape route from every room you've entered? My throat tightened, because the answer was no, to all of it. For the first time in 2 years, I had slept through the night without waking up in a cold sweat, listening for the sound of a key in a lock. For the first time in 2 years, I had eaten a meal without positioning myself near the nearest exit. For the first time in 2 years, my hands weren't shaking. Larry controlled you with fear, Inho said. I am offering you control through power. They are not the same thing. And you know that, even if admitting it terrifies you. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because he was right, and the rightness of it sat in my chest like a coal burning, undeniable, dangerous. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The fire burned low. The rain kept falling. At some point, I realized our knees were almost touching, and neither of us had moved away. At some point, I realized I'd stopped thinking of him as a stranger and started thinking of him as the only solid ground in a world that had been shaking beneath my feet for years. I didn't kiss him that night. He didn't kiss me. But something passed between us, in that dim, firelit room, a silent agreement, unspoken and irreversible, that whatever this was, I wasn't fighting it anymore. The next morning, everything shattered. I woke to the sound of boots on marble and voices in rapid Korean, sharp, urgent, the cadence of men who'd shifted from routine to crisis. By the time I made it to the hallway, Mrs. Yoon was already coming toward me, her composure intact, but her pace just fast enough to betray something underneath. "Please stay in your room, Miss Bennett." "What's happening?" "A security matter. Mr. Ryeo is handling it." Through the landing window, I saw them. 4 of Inho's men in the courtyard, surrounding a 5th man I didn't recognize, mid-20s, baseball cap, hands zip-tied behind his back, blood running from a cut above his eye. He was on his knees in the gravel, and even from the 2nd floor I could see him shaking. Inho stood in front of him, same posture as the parking lot, hands in his pockets, that terrible, patient stillness. He looked up at the window, saw me watching. His expression didn't change, but he turned to one of his men and said something I couldn't hear. 2 minutes later, the man in the baseball cap was dragged around the corner of the house and out of sight. Inho followed without looking back. Mrs. Yoon appeared beside me. "Come away from the window." "Who was that?" "Someone who made a mistake." Inho left the estate 20 minutes later. 3 vehicles. No explanation. "Mrs. Yoon told me he'd return by evening and that I should rest, eat, and not wander the East Wing." Later that night, when he did return, I overheard him on a phone call in the hallway. 2 words I understood clearly: Terrence and handled. I never heard that name again. I didn't ask. Some answers you don't need spelled out. So of course I wandered the East Wing. The door wasn't locked, an oversight, or maybe a test. The room behind it was large, windowless, and lit by cold fluorescent strips that reminded me of the hospital. Along one wall, a rack of weapons I couldn't name and didn't want to. Handguns, rifles, things with attachments that looked surgical. Along the opposite wall, a desk with 3 monitors, all dark, and a stack of leather-bound ledgers that looked like they belonged in a period film. I opened one. Columns of numbers, dates, names, some in English, some in Korean. Amounts that had too many zeros, locations I recognized, ports, warehouses, a medical supply depot I'd driven past on my way to work 100 times without ever wondering what was inside. This was his world. Not the fireplace and the Egyptian cotton and the chef who remembered I was allergic to shellfish. This was the engine underneath all of it. Cold, mechanical, built on money that came from places I didn't want to imagine. I closed the ledger. I left the room. I went back to my bedroom and sat on the bed and stared at the wall and tried to reconcile the man who'd asked me about my locks with the man whose armory had more firepower than a police precinct. I couldn't. And the terrifying part was that I wasn't sure I needed to. A week later, Inho arranged for me to visit a private clinic. Discreet, he said. His personal physician, just a checkup, my wrist needed imaging, and the bruising on my ribs from where Larry had shoved me into the wall hadn't fully healed. 2 of his men would escort me. Armored vehicle, tinted windows. A GPS tracker sewn into the lining of my jacket that I didn't know about yet. In and out in under an hour. We never made it inside the clinic. The intersection was 3 blocks away when the truck hit us. Not an accident, a battering ram. A white cargo van slammed into the driver's side at 40 miles an hour, spinning the armored SUV into a concrete divider. The airbags exploded. Glass sprayed across my face. The world went sideways, then upside down, then dark. When I came to, someone was dragging me. Not gently by my arm, my feet scraping across asphalt, my head bouncing against something metal. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear Larry's voice barking orders at 2 men I didn't recognize. Behind us, the SUV sat caved in against the divider. Inho's driver was slumped over the wheel, unconscious. The second guard was on the asphalt, clutching his leg where a piece of the door frame had pinned it during the crash. Both alive. Neither able to stop what was happening. I learned later how Larry found us. Terrence had delivered the license plate before. Inho's people got to him. Larry ran the plate through a cousin who worked at a body shop that serviced fleet vehicles, the kind of shop that kept records of armored modifications and the private clinics their clients frequented. It wasn't genius. It was desperate, sloppy legwork, by a man too angry to stop pulling threads. But sometimes anger gets lucky. The air smelled like diesel and rust and dust. I heard a roller door slam shut. The light changed from daylight to the sickly yellow of bare industrial bulbs. A warehouse, concrete floor, steel columns, the kind of place where sound echoes and nobody hears you. Larry's face swam into focus above me. Worse than before. The bruises from Inho's beating had faded to a mottled yellow-green, but his eyes were different now. The calculating cruelty I'd known for years had been replaced by something unhinged, fractured, feral, a man who'd crossed the line from obsession into something that didn't have a clinical name. Found you. He was grinning, blood on his teeth from the crash. A gun in his right hand, small, black, trembling slightly. Your boyfriend's little security detail wasn't as tough as they looked. 2 guys. That's all he sent? 2 guys for the woman he's supposedly protecting? He grabbed my hair and pulled me upright. My vision swam. My left arm hung wrong, dislocated. Maybe from the crash. Pain bloomed white across my shoulder. You're going to call him, Larry said. You're going to tell him where you are. And when he shows up, he's going to watch me take back what's mine. Larry, call him. I didn't have to. Somewhere in the lining of my jacket, a GPS chip the size of a grain of rice had been transmitting my coordinates since the moment the SUV left the estate. Inho's people had known something was wrong within 90 seconds of the crash. They'd had my location before Larry finished dragging me through the warehouse door. The roller door at the far end of the warehouse exploded inward. Not opened, breached. The metal crumpling like aluminum foil as a black SUV punched through it at speed and skidded to a stop on the concrete floor. Headlights turning the dust into a blinding white curtain. Before the echo died, men poured through the gap. 6, 8, 10. Black tactical gear. Weapons drawn. Moving in a formation so precise it looked choreographed. And behind them, walking through the wreckage of the door like he was entering a boardroom, was Ryeo In Ho. He'd changed. Not his clothes, he was still in black, still immaculate, still moving with that preternatural calm that made other men's urgency look like panic. But his face had changed. The mask of composure that I'd studied for days, that I'd sat across from by the fireplace, that I'd almost kissed, it was gone. What was underneath was worse. Not rage. Rage is hot and loud and burns itself out. This was cold. Industrial. The expression of a man who had already decided exactly what was going to happen and was simply walking through the steps. Larry spun toward the door, the gun swinging wildly. He fired twice. The shots went wide, punching into a steel column. Inho didn't flinch, didn't slow. One of his men disarmed Larry with a single strike to the wrist. The gun clattered across the floor, and 2 more forced him to his knees. Inho stopped in front of him. He looked down at Larry, the way he'd looked at him in the parking lot. Except now there was no inconvenience in his expression. There was nothing in his expression. He'd emptied himself out to make room for what came next. You were warned, Inho said. What followed lasted 4 minutes. I know, because I counted every second the way I'd counted the 11 in the parking lot. Except this time, I couldn't look away. Inho didn't use a weapon. He used his hands. He broke Larry apart piece by piece, with a patience that was more horrifying than any explosion of rage could ever be. Methodical. Surgical. He targeted the joint's first wrist, elbow, knee, each one, a deliberate, mechanical destruction, accompanied by a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. Larry screamed until his voice gave out. And then he just made noises. Guttural. Animal. The sounds of a human being reduced to something less than human. But the worst part wasn't the physical violence. The worst part was when Inho crouched beside what was left of Larry, gripped his jaw, and forced him to look up. Say her name. Larry's mouth moved. Blood and spit and broken teeth. Say it. Our Rebecca. Now say you'll never touch her again. A sob. Wrecked and pathetic and small. I'll never. You won't, because you are leaving this warehouse alive, Larry. I want you alive. I want you to spend every remaining day in a body that remembers what happens when you reach for something that is no longer yours. Inho released his jaw. Larry collapsed sideways. His breathing was shallow, ragged, wet. He was alive, broken in ways that would never fully heal, but alive. And that, I realized, was the cruelty of it. Death would have been mercy. Inho didn't deal in mercy. He stood up, turned around, walked toward me. His hands were covered in blood, Larry's blood, and it dripped from his knuckles onto the concrete in a rhythm that sounded almost like rain. His face was still empty, still void. The man from the fireplace was gone, and the thing standing in front of me was the version of Ryeo In Ho that the world was supposed to be afraid of. He stopped 2 feet away from me. He didn't speak. He just stood there, hands at his sides, blood running down his fingers, and waited. Waited for me to scream. Waited for me to run. Waited for me to look at him, the way every person in his life had eventually looked at him. With the horror and revulsion that a monster deserves, I looked at his hands. I looked at the blood. I looked at Larry's crumpled form behind him, still breathing, still whimpering in the dust. And I reached out and took Inho's hands in mine. He went rigid. The first time I'd ever felt his body react to something it didn't expect. I held his wrists gently, those tattooed wrists that had just done something unforgivable, and I pulled them toward me. I took the sleeve of my sweater, the maroon sweater I'd been wearing the night he first stepped out of that SUV, and I used it to wipe the blood from his knuckles. Slowly. Carefully. The way you clean a wound. He watched me do it. His jaw tightened. Something behind those black eyes cracked open, not warmth, not softness, but something raw and unnamed that I don't think he'd let anyone see in a very long time. You should be afraid of me, he said quietly. I spent 2 years being afraid of the wrong man. I'm done being afraid. I finished cleaning his hands. The sweater was ruined, stained dark and permanent. I didn't care. I held his hands in mine and looked up at him, and for the first time since the parking lot, his expression changed. Not a smile. Something too complicated and too broken to be a smile. But the emptiness was gone. Take me home, I said. He understood what I meant. Not my apartment, not the hospital, not any version of the life I'd been clinging to. Home was the estate. Home was the fortress. Home was the armory, and the ledgers, and the men with guns, and the chef who remembered my allergies, and the fireplace where we almost kissed, and the man standing in front of me, with blood drying in the lines of his palms. Home was the darkness. And I was done pretending I wanted the light. He pulled me to my feet. His arm went around my waist, steady, grounding, real. We walked out of that warehouse together, past his men, past the wreckage, past the broken remnants of a man who would never follow me again. The night air hit my face, cold and clean, and I breathed it in like I was breathing for the first time. In the SUV, he held my hand. Neither of us spoke. The city blurred past the tinted windows, and I watched the lights streak by and thought about the woman I'd been before all of this. The woman who froze, who couldn't scream, who held her keys between her fingers and prayed. That would be enough. That woman was gone. She died somewhere between the parking lot and the warehouse and the fireplace and the blood on a maroon sweater. What was left was something new, something harder. Something that had looked into the abyss and found it looking back with black eyes and tattooed hands and a voice that turned one word into a verdict. Rebecca Bennett didn't survive. She transformed. And the world that had spent years trying to break her was about to learn what happens when a woman stops running and starts ruling. Can Rebecca truly trust a man whose protection comes wrapped in blood and darkness? And what will she become now that she's chosen to stand at his side? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you. Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you do not want to miss what happens next.